I think that anyone who becomes a prosecutor realizes the cases that you care about the most are the ones when the most innocent of us are hurt or murdered. If you can't protect them, then what are you doing? My grandma was 99 when she passed away, and I remember thinking, oh, she's super safe. When she went to her retirement home, nothing can happen to her. You have to feel that way. You need to feel that way. But in 2018, law enforcement officers around Dallas, Texas, happened upon a serial killer that was preying on a world of very vulnerable victims. Everyone assumed since the victims were older, they were dying of natural causes. But these were not natural deaths, it was murder. And the killer was able to take the lives of over 20 people.
Police say they plan to review every single death of an elderly woman in the area where there was no witness.
That morning, I was out running errands, and Scott called me and said he got a call from somebody who said that Mom didn't make it to the Dallas Cowboys watching party, and she wasn't at church.
It's terrifying when you get that call that somebody who's very reliable, who never missed a Cowboy game in the history of the Cowboys, was missing church, missing her friends, missing that Cowboy party, and not answering her phone. You panic. After calling our mother multiple times and her not answering, then it was very obvious there was something wrong. I contacted Rob, and we headed straight to the house.
I was the first one there, unlocked the door, called for her, ran through the living room, and I saw her feet sticking out on the side of the bed. She was really pale. Her arm was across her face. I took her arm across, and her glasses were all messed up. She was unresponsive, dead on her bedroom floor.
I'm just in shock.
2 weeks before, the doctor said, perfect health, you're gonna live another 20 years. What happened?
Your brain's trying to process that this woman that you'd spent Christmas with a week before is laying crumpled on the floor, dead. Rob stepped out to call 911. This flood of people to start rolling in, first responders, the EMTs, then the police show up. The detective had told me, they've looked her over, they don't see any signs of a struggle, no bruising, they turned her back, everything was fine.
We asked the police, hey, we noticed that she was missing her rings on her fingers, her wedding ring and then the ring that my dad got her.
That she never took off. These were fixtures, and they were gone.
And they say old people hide stuff. The police didn't think there was any foul play. It was natural causes.
Our mother was very engaged in church, very supportive of the community. She was a very positive person. She was very optimistic. Things were always going to work out, keep a positive attitude, look to the future, be nice to people, things tend to work out. That was kind of how she lived her life.
Sweet, sweet lady.
Couldn't have asked for a better woman to raise us, to be there for us through our entire lives.
When you think of the safest, nicest, most well-off part of Dallas County, you think of Plano, Texas. It's where you go when you have everything. So if your mother is retired there, living in a home there, you're gonna think she's pretty safe. But in 2018, all that was put into question.
Plano 911, what's the emergency?
We have a neighbor that we cannot awake.
Okay, is she
Yes,
breathing?
she is breathing.
Okay, and how old are they?
She must be almost 90.
Okay.
We can't wake her up.
After the paramedic spoke with Mary Bartell, he felt there was something more to this story, and he wanted an officer to investigate this. I responded to the hospital, spoke with Mary Bartell, introduced myself to her, and asked her if she would tell me in her own words what had happened. At around 8:30 in the morning, she walks to her front door after hearing constant knocking. As she was going to the door, this suspect pushes his way in. First thing she sees and focuses on is his green gloves. He told her to go to the bed, and she just complied. When she got to the bed, he pushed her down, grabbed one of her pillows from her bed, and put it on top of her face and chest and just pushed down real hard. Mary Bartell thought she was going to die. That's the last she remembers. Mary Bartell states that she was missing jewelry, rings that she had on both of her hands, one of those rings being a wedding ring that she's had for 50 years and never really took it off. My first priority was to get an investigator to Mary Bartell's house. So I contact another detective, and as she was going to process Mary Bartell's crime scene, she learns there is a suspicious death investigation right across the hall, which is Ann Conklin's residence. So at that point, the Plano Police Department was investigating one death, Ann Conklin, and attempted murder on Mary Bartell to see if they were related or not. We started to do a canvass, looking for any other witnesses, any other video, anything that would give us a lead. We learned that just a few days before, on March 15th, a gentleman by the name of Richard Plink picked up his mother to take her to a doctor's appointment and observed this black male, well-dressed, sitting in his Nissan Altima at Preston Place. And later, he noticed the same person was still in the same parking lot, but at a different parking spot. He just thought it was weird, so he asked him if he could help him with anything. And this man stated that he was fine, that he was just waiting for his next therapy appointment. That's not really unusual because there's older people in that community, but that was not settling to him. So he wrote down the license plate, and when we ran it, we learned the driver of that car was listed as Billy Schmiermeyer. So we started looking at Billy Schmiermeyer a little bit more and learned that he had some prior arrests for criminal trespass at another senior living center in Dallas. Now we know that we need to locate Billy Schmiermeyer. There was this red jewelry box with a name of Lou T. Harris.
With the possibility of more victims on their hands, officers do a welfare check on Lou T. Harris.
4 or 5 cases quickly jumped to almost 10 cases.
An attack on a 90-year-old woman named Mary Bartell leads police to the connection of another case that might be related in another part of Dallas, where a suspect named Billy Schmiermeyer had a prior arrest for a criminal trespass at another senior living facility 2 years earlier.
Edgemere is a senior living facility in Dallas. And in April of 2016, security personnel had noticed that this man had been around and they weren't sure why, and he was given a warning not to return. Then he did return in June.
This man is stating that he was a healthcare worker involved with the location, which ultimately was not true. And Dallas PD identified him as from Billy Schmiermeyer. He had no affiliation with that location and was given a criminal trespass. So we had started looking at Billy Schmiermeyer a little bit more. Billy Schmiermeyer is an individual who came to the United States in the early 2000s from Kenya, who had a visa for a short period of time to be here to work and got into the healthcare business as a caregiver. So we started getting very suspicious that maybe our person of interest in the attack on Mary Bartell and the death of Ann Conklin is Billy Schmiermeyer. We learned from Dallas PD that Billy Schmiermeyer had a warrant out for his arrest for public intoxication out of Dallas. Detective Tripiate and I discussed it and said, he's a person of interest. Let's get him in custody, bring him to the Plano Police Department jail, sit down and talk to him and see what we learn. The arrest team set several officers throughout his apartment complex. A person who we believe to be Billy Shemermer drove in around 6 p.m. We had a detective near a dumpster. Billy Shemermer drives to that dumpster and then discarded some items. He was able to see Billy Shemermer get back into his car and drive to his assigned parking space. They went up to him and made the arrest. And when they extracted him out of the vehicle, on his person, Billy Shemermer had some jewelry, bracelets, some $2 bills. As they detained him, they went and looked at the dumpster to find out what did he discard. There was this red jewelry box, and it had miscellaneous items with a name of Lou T. Harris.
With the possibility of more victims on their hands, while Billy Shemermer is being detained, officers do a welfare check on Lou T. Harris, who lives in the Dallas city limits, which borders Plano, Texas.
Upon our arrival, we were told by Dallas PD that Ms. Harris was located inside the residence. The residence was secure, and she was found deceased next to her bed. Everything appeared to be natural. We discussed with Dallas PD deployment that we were investigating, specifically Mary Bartell, and that the likelihood of the weapon being a pillow, because that's what Mary Bartell described her weapon to be. They went back inside and found a smeared lipstick on Lou T. Harris's pillow. We also informed them that we found a set of keys in the center console of the car that Billy Shemermer was arrested out of. And they confirmed that the keys go to her front door. At that point, they agreed based on what they found and our investigation with Mary Bartell, it was decided that Dallas PD Homicide needed to get involved.
I'm feeling a lot of fear and panic because we've never had police presence on our street. One of the neighbors told me Lou T had been murdered. To think that something like this would have happened to Lou T was beyond sad. Lou was friendly. She was funny.
Lou T. Harris is a fascinating woman. She had grown up in Vietnam, and she was actually airlifted out of Saigon when it fell. She married an American man, and she made a life for herself here in Texas.
In 2018, Lou was living by herself. Her husband had already passed away. So you never really thought about, we need to make sure if she needs something, because she always gave you the complete sense of independence.
The day after the arrest of Billy Shemermer, my partner and I go to Dallas PD and go speak with Billy Shemermer in their interview room.
Detective Trubiante. Plano Police.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Martinez. Good to meet you.
Billy Shemermer was just like a happy person, not a worry.
Been a busy night, hasn't it?
It is.
It is.
When Billy Shemermer was initially arrested, it was only for a Class C public intoxication, but that allows them to take him into custody and ask him questions about anything they want to. At some point after that, if they believe there's enough evidence to charge him with something else, they can.
Those people scared me yesterday, the officers was like, I thought that looked like a movie, and I was like, is this real?
Oh, it's real.
No, and
Our thought process going into this is we're not going to probably get a confession from him.
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
We just wanted him to talk and see what nuggets of evidence that we could use against him.
You're telling me that your phone stays with you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No one else has that phone?
No.
When Billy Shemermer is being detained, shockingly, he agrees to voluntarily give them his cell phone. Maybe because at that time he didn't realize that would also give the investigators access to his text messages, any photos he had on his phone, and also his GPS locations.
So Monday would be the 19th.
Yeah.
Or what'd you do that morning?
Oh, that morning I went to meet this guy on, I had a ring and to sell to this guy on, there on 75 and Coit. There's a Starbucks there.
March 19th, when Mary Bartell was attacked and possibly Ann Conklin, he told us, oh, he did go sell a ring. He went to Starbucks, but stated up and down that he was never at Preston Place in the morning. He was at home at the time.
You know the Preston Place is basically adult living center?
Your phone is telling us that you're there too.
No.
When we did legal process and got his cell phone records and got his location data, that was absolutely a lie.
If you're involved in this or not?
No, I'm okay.
And he was professing that he was innocent, not worried that he did anything wrong, that evidence was showed that he did nothing wrong. And it was like, okay, do you mind giving us your DNA?
Are you allowing us to get the buckle swab?
Yeah.
Okay.
So okay with that, voluntarily giving that to us?
Sure.
Make sure you're okay with that.
I am very okay. Anything in there, fingerprints, lie detector test.
Okay.
After talking to Billy Shamir Mir, he was charged with the capital murder of Lou T. Harris and the attempted murder of Mary Bartell.
I want the truth.
That's I don't even need a lawyer, and I did not do any wrong.
Point of police.
Good. Martinez.
Billy Shamir Mir is under arrest for the attacks and murders of elderly women in Dallas and Plano, Texas. But they want to build their cases and find more evidence to make the cases even stronger.
Early in the morning, the time we were interviewing Billy Shamir Mir, Dallas PD was wrapping up their crime scene investigation in Lou T. Harris's home. They found that there was a receipt that showed a nearby Walmart and her making a purchase prior to her death, which led them to Walmart to investigate that further. And learned that Billy Shamir Mir was also at that same Walmart just prior to Lou T. Harris being killed in her home. It is suspected that Billy Shamir Mir is at that Walmart hunting for victims. He's scoping out Lou T. Harris, doing some surveillance on her, looking for opportunity and to determine if this is going to be someone he can victimize.
As you have detectives working on the cases in Plano and in Dallas, the investigators become aware of yet another case in Richardson, Texas. Mary Brooks died 2 months prior to the first cases.
Mary Brooks was an 87-year-old woman who was living in the Dallas area. On January 31st, 2018, Mary Brooks's grandson gets a call from his mother, who's worried about her mother, and she asks him to check on her. And the grandson found that his grandmother was dead.
I was just gonna do one last look at her just to make sure I didn't see any suspicious wounds or anything.
There were groceries all out on her counters. They hadn't been put away. Her family discovered missing jewelry. And there was a receipt that showed that she had been on a shopping trip to Walmart.
Richardson PD's investigation led him to the same Walmart that Lou T. Harris was at. She was grocery shopping on the day she was killed, but they didn't have a suspect at that time until we learned of Billy Shamir Mir, Walmart, and Lou T. Harris. So then Richardson PD started to look, okay, can we put Billy Shamir Mir at the Walmart? When Mary Brooks was there, Richardson PD was able to show in the video Billy Shamir Mir was parked in relation to where Mary Brooks was parked. And when Mary Brooks returned to her car, you see the silver Nissan Altima, which is believed to be Billy Shamir Mir's vehicle, exit with her and follow behind her. And shortly after is when she was found deceased. We met with Dallas PD, Richardson PD, Frisco PD. They also had some stuff that they were very interested in Billy Shamir Mir being their person of interest. And when we looked at it, it's like, okay, let's look at the location data. Can we put Billy Shamir Mir there? Oh, we can. We're jumping from cases to cases, and 4 or 5 cases quickly jumped to almost 10 cases. And it spiderwebbed from that point.
On July 16th, 2018, there was a phone message from a task force that was investigating a killer who went around to independent living properties. My mother, Doris Gleason's death was being investigated as a homicide. It took my breath away. On Sunday, October 30th, 2016, I drove over to pick my mother up for church. I get to the door is unlocked. I walk in and see her on the floor over by the dining room table, and she was gone. She was 92. I felt shock, sadness, a bit of devastation. I had never experienced a death like that. And then when I hear that Mama had been murdered, I am floored.
The detective who was working the Shamir case called me to go and look at pictures of jewelry that they'd gotten off of Billy Shamir's phone. We asked the detective, are you implying that you think that Billy Shamir killed our mother? And he said, I'm convinced of it. He said, I've already pulled records from his cell phone, and his cell phone was in the vicinity of her house on Saturday and on Sunday morning before you found her dead. Suddenly you find out she's died violently, and you start the grieving process all over again. And now you're grieving a violent death.
While Billy Shamir is in custody, 4 different police departments are already working on all these investigations, and the number is now up to 22 different victims. This makes Billy Shamir one of the most horrendous, prolific serial murders in Texas history. But will there be enough evidence on any one of these cases to actually convict him?
When the case first came into our office, there was talks about that we might have a serial killer that is preying on elderly individuals. To be honest with you, I didn't think it would turn into the volume of cases that it actually turned into. I just didn't think that was possible. In the end, he had 22 indictments for capital murder and 2 indictments for attempted capital murder out of not only our county, Dallas County, but also including Collin County. It is a lot. Just had total disregard for human life. And then judicial economy, in the end, you can't try all of these cases. We had what we believed the strongest case with the Lou T. Harris. Mr. Shamir was found with her property hours after being with her. We went back and found him at Walmart at the same time. And so that became a very strong case for us circumstantially.
Having Mama's case not being tried was incredibly frustrating, but I also recognize the need for the strongest case. The goal was to get those convictions. And if that wasn't my mom's case, then okay.
I was brought on to Billy's case and became one of his 3 attorneys. I was intrigued in regards to the facts and allegations in and of itself, and then just the sheer number of indictments that were coming out against Mr. Shamir. No matter the number of indictments or charges against him, he's simply accused. And that's what we have to make the jury aware of, is until they decide something different, meaning that the state has proven its case to each and every one of them beyond a reasonable doubt. He's just simply accused of these offenses.
The challenges in this case are, let's be honest, the amount of evidence was overwhelming. Was it circumstantial? Yeah, but what a lot of circumstantial evidence. That being said, you still have to present that evidence very understandably, very concisely. And the other big challenge you always have is you still have to pick your jury, and you better not pick one bad juror.
Our goal in this case was to see that Billy Shamir died in prison. In these types of cases for the death penalty, we would have to go to Kenya. We would have to do those types of things to do a good full background on him. That was unavailable to us. It was unavailable to the defense. And we would have to have delayed it even further. And we needed to get resolution to this case.
In the morning, jury selection will begin in Dallas for the trial of an alleged serial killer. That is Billy Shamir. The pandemic is going to prevent victims' families from witnessing his trial in person.
The whole scenario was just different. We were not allowed to have anybody in the courtroom that was not part of the trial. The victims' families, they couldn't face the person who had done this to their loved one. They had to watch it like everybody else did through closed circuit television.
If I'm on a jury in COVID time and the family members have to come in one by one with masks on to testify, that's not going to have the same impact as seeing a courtroom full of cops and victims' family members and people watching the trial. They didn't get the real feel of anybody's pain or anguish or frustration.
In opening statement, I really just want to tell the jury kind of a glimpse of what they're going to see, what they're going to hear, and how I believe the case is going to be set out. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about stalking, smothering, and stealing. When it came time to presenting evidence to the jury, we really wanted to show that there was a close connection to Billy Chemirmir and Ms. Harris. When the Plano Police Department arrested Billy Chemirmir, he had in his hands the jewelry of Luty Harris. And I used family members to identify those items and say, yes, I recognize those as being things that she was wearing. Do you know any reason why she would get rid of these things?
No, those were her personal items that she wore every day.
We then present cell phone data showing Mr. Chemirmir's actions, placing him at locations that link directly to Lou Harris. We relied heavily on the FBI in putting together our mapping of the pattern of Billy Chemirmir on these days. Typically, he would go to a location where there is a victim. He would stay there for a certain amount of time, pick his victim, murder them, take their jewelry. Then he would travel down to a known location where you could sell these items and then head back home.
Are these cell phone records we see here March 15th, March 19th, and March 20th?
Yes, sir.
So to respond to this state, asserting that Billy was at these locations by way of the cell phone data, what their expert is able to say is that the device that they believe belonged to Billy Chemirmir was pinged or located in certain areas, but they cannot say that it was actually Billy himself. It's simply the device.
The defense's strategy in this case, with the overwhelming amount of evidence that there was to try to create reasonable doubt. You try to poke holes in each witness little by little and argue reasonable doubt. In this case, you would think that's a stretch because there was so much evidence, but sometimes that tactic works.
In criminal trials, using evidence of other crimes or bad acts is generally not admissible. However, it can be for limited purposes. In this case, it was more for motive and identity, since no one actually saw him kill anyone, but we wanted them to know that this same person with the same profile and the same similar acts had been with other women who were killed. This is the correct person. We have the right person.
Would you raise your right hand, please?
We decided to go with Mary Bartell because she brings to this case a voice for all the victims. She is the victim who survived, and she was able to tell her story through deposition.
I heard this very insistent rapping at the door. The door was opening inward, and when my eyes were just fixated on these green rubber gloves, I knew instantly, number one, I should not have opened the door. Number two, my life was in grave danger. He just smashed a pillow down hard over my face and my chest, and I just couldn't breathe.
The defense lawyer was able to cross-examine her in her deposition the same way he would have in the courtroom before COVID happened.
She said the individual that walked in was very articulate and very well spoken, and asked about an accent. She said she didn't recall hearing an accent.
You didn't notice any kind of accent or anything about his voice that stood out to you?
No, I was just mainly concerned about whether I could get some help before I died.
And anyone that's ever heard Billy speak, he has a very thick accent. And that's important. The jury needs to understand that that's important.
Did you ever look at his face?
I was fixated by the green rubber gloves.
Okay, so you never did get a look at his face?
No, I did not.
There was nothing that placed him there except for Mary Bartell. And so if you think she's mistaken or that credibility is not as high as what you would like it to be as a juror, then you set that case aside and ask yourself, is the evidence sufficient to prove that it was Billy beyond all reasonable doubt?
We wanted to show Mr. Chemirmir's interrogation video because Billy Chemirmir did not have a good story as to why he's in possession of Lou T. Harris's items. He stated that he acquired them from a man on the side of the road. He couldn't give us the man's name. It just seems so illogical that he is at Walmart with Lou T. Harris and then happens to buy from some random man her items hours later and is caught with them.
You had their money. You had their jewelry. And you had their jewelry box.
I believe them playing his statement backfired a little bit. And the reason I say that is because he gave himself a defense.
Do you think that the items are stolen?
That was what I was thinking, because I was like, why is he bringing all this, the box with everything?
Way too many times in my career, when I was getting ready for trial, I would tell my main detective, I'm not going to offer your interview of the defendant. And they would get very upset. And I would say, no, it's self-serving. He doesn't tell the whole truth. He minimizes his involvement. He acts like it's self-defense. Why would I offer his version of what happened? By presenting the videotaped interview of Billy Chemirmir, the state allowed that to be his way of putting his defense on. And they weren't able to cross-examine him at the same time because he never had to testify. And the state doesn't get to say, we call Billy Chemirmir to the stand. It's not up to them. If he chooses not to testify, that's the end of his story.
That's what this entire case is about, is reasonable doubt. And it is rampant.
There was so much evidence that they had introduced.
You've seen an exorbitant amount of evidence and items put in, but we're talking about quality and not quantity.
And that was my argument, is they're presenting all these things, but what is the quality of this evidence in regards to them meeting their burden?
In this day and age, with what juries expect today with modern forensics, which I'm so sick of hearing, there's no such thing as too much evidence. I wish we could all have that problem.
This is the first time in my career as a prosecutor I have been accused of bringing too much evidence. It was mentioned a couple of times that this is going to be a difficult chore on your part. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think it's going to be that difficult. Once we concluded closing statements, the case is in the jury's hands. We just have to wait now for their answer.
I happened to be there in the courthouse, and the evidence was so well laid out. So we were expecting 30 minutes later the jury to come back. And as that jury waited and waited and waited and then went home to come back the next day, we were very concerned.
And it went a little longer and kept going a little longer. And I said, well, somebody's back there thinking.
This case should have been a slam dunk, and you would expect a quick verdict. But it took over 2 days. The jury was still deliberating, and they still hadn't come up with a verdict.
After several notes that were sent out by the jury, they were deadlocked, unable to reach a verdict.
Judge Jones, we remain deadlocked at 11-1. After additional deliberation, we've received no change.
Then I moved and requested a mistrial, and it was granted.
Mistrial has occurred, or a hung jury has occurred.
We are just disappointed that they could not come to the correct and obvious.
I don't have a word to describe the unfairness, the injustice.
Given that Lou T. Harris's case was, by the prosecutor's judgment, their strongest case, and they got a hung jury, they had to have been devastated when they got that back. Unfortunately, what all those family members learned is with the jury, you never know what's going to happen.
When I heard of the mistrial, I was disappointed for the families and immediately started thinking about participating in the second trial.
The elected DAs in big counties have a huge office to run. 300 lawyers work for them. So when the DA, John Crusoe, comes aboard to try the case with Glenn Fitzmartin, that's a big deal.
We went into the second trial terrified of another mistrial.
I think there was also resolve on the part of the families to come back and make sure that we did whatever we could to help the DA to close that case on the next time through.
In the second trial, the COVID restrictions have lessened a little bit, so we're now able to put the courtroom back to the way we're used to it, where spectators are allowed in, family members are allowed in.
The court was filled with so many families from other victims feeling like that may be their day in court, and certainly hoping for justice for Lucci, but also justice for their family members also.
I've been licensed for 42 years, and I was a judge for 22 years, so I saw a lot of cases tried. To me, voir dire is probably the most important part of the case.
Voir dire, it's not the glamorous part, but it's the part where you better not get it wrong, because if you do, one juror can ruin everything. In this case, they had to voir dire question a whole big group of people at the same time, and then to decide how many strikes they were going to use against how many people.
So looking back after we had a hung jury, I thought that we could do better in the jury selection process. I think the art of jury selection is understanding what your issues and problems are and being able to fashion a voir dire that helped them understand exactly what the law was. For example, circumstantial evidence, and helping them understand that circumstantial evidence does not mean weak evidence, and committing to, if we prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt with circumstantial evidence, they could return a verdict of guilty.
It makes me crazy that too many people think that circumstantial evidence cases are weak, because they're not, and they never have been, and they never will be, because every little piece points to the same thing, and every little piece is the truth. And when you put them all together, how beautiful can that be?
The main difference in this trial is that you do not see the taped police interview with Billy Shamir.
I didn't go to anybody's apartment.
When they didn't play the interview at the arrest, that was a game changer, because that way he wasn't able to spew his lies without any cross-examination.
During the closing argument, District Attorney Crusoe linked the evidence back to what he had talked to the jurors about in his voir dire in the selection of the jury.
I told them we're counting on them to do what they promised under oath that they would do, and reminding them of the issues that we went over with them, especially circumstantial evidence. If you had said no, you wouldn't be on this jury. We brought you the evidence, and the only thing left is your job to deliberate, follow the law, and in our opinion, return a verdict of guilty.
The argument still is, it's still beyond a reasonable doubt, that it's extremely circumstantial. Argument is still that there's no direct evidence placing him in the home of Lucci Harris. There's no direct evidence placing him on the street of Miss Harris. There's no direct evidence even in the extraneous case that places him in Miss Bartel's home or neighborhood.
At the end of all the closing arguments, I think there's a healthy amount of anxiety in everybody in the courtroom, especially the families, because they've watched this not turn out well a few months before. And for me, I know, because of 42 years of practicing law, that I have no idea what they're going to do.
This was a stunningly fast verdict for a capital murder trial. Jury deliberated less than an hour.
It's like pins and needles. It's high anxiety. But we had the rug pulled out from us before, so our trust is really low that this is going to be okay.
The jury has reached a verdict, and that verdict is: we, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
Billy Shamir was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And I knew at that moment in time that Billy Shamir would die in prison.
I have goosebumps when the jury renders the conviction that he is guilty. There is such a flood of relief.
On behalf of the many victims, we are incredibly relieved that justice is finally here, especially after the mistrial 5 months ago.
There was a lot of relief and joy that justice had finally been done.
About time. Why did it take two? But everybody's just as happy as can be that he's never going to get out of prison.
I look at Lucci's death and I could sound strange, but I think that she would be proud to know that she ended all of that, all of those killings, that was the end. After her, that was it. And they got him.
Well, what was satisfying about this verdict was that Mr. Shamir Mir had announced to a news station that he would never go to the penitentiary. And when that verdict came back, of course, I looked at him. He didn't have much expression, but I thought, you're on your way, buddy.
I think the whole experience has got us both thinking about how to protect elderly people.
When I worked through that, Mama was the 8th victim in 3.5 months, and that this had happened at 3 other well-respected properties in the Metroplex. That's when I knew that something had to change. Secure Our Senior Safety is a nonprofit foundation committed to showing the vulnerabilities in independent senior living and hopefully correcting those vulnerabilities. SOSS is proud that we got 2 bills through on legislation to change the security in independent living. My mother was incredibly private, and that was a real big struggle for me in the beginning. She believed a lady's name was in the paper when she got married and when she died. And so for my mother's face to be splattered everywhere in her name, my mother would not like that. But over time, I think Mama understands my commitment to make her friends safer than she had been. And in that way, I think she's proud of it.
Can you imagine the impact and the horror that came on over 20 different families because of all the people that Billy Shamir Mir murdered? I think the good that came of this is that those facilities have made stronger safeguards. Some laws have changed to try and ensure that that keeps happening. And let's hope that when we have our grandparents and parents and even us go into places like that from now on, they're way more protected as a result of what happened in this case.